And I want to share the benefits of doing the sermon on Sunday mornings. I get to select my favorite flowers, daisies, which Soledad graciously presented at me this morning. And you also get to pick out your favorite readings and music. Everything we've played today one part of me that you all don't know, and I thought about it while we were playing Simple Gifts. Back in the 90s, I learned how to play the lap dulcimer, and I played that tune in church. My first and last musical presentation. Oh, I also want to thank y'all for coming today. We had 100 people in the sanctuary last week. Must have tired them out. I'm so glad that you 40 came today, and also those of you on Zoom. A few weeks ago, Hugh, and I don't remember his last name, mentioned in his UU journey, in preparation for his talk, he had to look back on his life and his philosophy of living. I too found I had to do that for this talk. For me, life just kind of happens. It just goes on. I do what is best for myself at the time, never really thinking of the overall scheme of things. As I look back, I have been a Unitarian Universalist since confirmation class in 6th grade at the First United Methodist Church in Birmingham, Michigan. Little did they know what they did to me. To be confirmed, one had to memorize 25 statements, I'm presuming of belief. We memorized 5 each week. No big deal at that age. I'm sure we were supposed to believe what we were learning, but that was not important to me. One of our learnings in the class was about original sin. That was the beginning of my fall from Christianity. How could a baby, or me, be sinful? It didn't make any sense. And as I got a little older, how could Jesus dying for my sins make my bad behavior okay? Nope, didn't get that part. The actual confirmation ceremony happened on Palm Sunday. We wore white robes. The girls had to wear hosiery. That was back in 1957, and 13-year-old girls usually wore short white socks with cuffs that turned down. I think they were called bobby, no. Well, I was the smallest kid in my 6th grade class and the confirmation class. The minister was a family friend. We went to the weddings of their kids and stuff like that. And my mom said to him, "Alan, I don't know where I'm going to find a garter belt small enough for Susie." My only thought was, does a loving God really care what Susie wears on her legs at confirmation class? Nope. As I said, I was at First Methodist Church of Birmingham, which is an upper-class church, and we dressed appropriately. Actually, I only had one Sunday outfit any given year, and it was made by my mom or grandma, and I wore that every single Sunday. One Easter Sunday while I was in junior high, a play was presented to all the children, so fewer teachers were needed and they could go to spend Easter with their families. In the play, I played the teenager. That meant I got to wear Bermuda shorts and knee socks on Easter Sunday. Oh, I was in my glory. In college, I became active in Wesley Foundation, the Methodist student group. I was there primarily for the social activities. There was a number of guys studying for the ministry. I thought, maybe if I married one of them, a light bulb would flash in my brain and I would figure out all this Christianity stuff. Didn't happen. In my young adult life, I attended several Methodist churches, again, primarily for the social life. When one joins a Methodist church, one has to profess to, among other things, that you believe in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit and take Jesus as your Savior. Folks never answered the question very loud, so I'd whisper, I'm trying to believe. And that was the truth. We moved to Arlington, Texas in 1978. The Methodist church across the street from our apartment complex had built a new sanctuary. How handy? Wrong. The carpet in the sanctuary emitted an odor that I just could not tolerate. Another church a couple miles away would not put me to work, even though I had been very active in my previous churches in Michigan. So I became unchurched. I did a lot of reading and studying during my 2 unchurched years. Among them, The History of Western Philosophy by Bertrand Russell. It must have been an eye-opener to me because I still remember the author, though it took a little bit to figure it out. I need to read it again to determine what impressed me. Just for me, reading a book on Western philosophy blows my mind, but back then I did that. I had been active in the battered women's support team in Michigan, so I continued those activities in my new town. In 1979, I became a manager of the battered women's shelter run by the First Baptist Church in Arlington, Texas. Being their employee, I could use their facilities. They had a really nice running track above their gym, and I could take classes. At one of the classes, the teacher said that one really had to study the Bible and other Christian materials to get a full understanding of Christianity. Having to study deeply to understand one's faith didn't really seem to be right to me. To me, the religion should have come relatively easy so the common person, like me, could comprehend and believe. In another class I took, the teacher had recently been in an automobile accident. He said it was God's punishment for thinking badly about a former boss. I was teaching defensive driving at the time, and I know he just was not paying attention and had an accident. And then I decided to go to graduate school. My husband and sister had master's degrees, and my brother-in-law a PhD. And I just had a bachelor's degree. The University of Texas at Arlington, which I could ride my bike to, had several graduate degrees. I entered the School of Social Work because it required no prerequisites like nursing or business administration. And I was already working in the field, so that sounded good to me. For one of my first courses, we had to write a paper on some concern of social work. I chose Sex Education in the Schools. Back then, when writing a paper, we would go to the library and the reference room and look for appropriate journal articles in those big, thick, green books. Remember them? What were they called? There was a name for them.
Reader's Guide?
Reader's Guide? I don't know, but they were these huge, humongous things. Well, all articles on sex education in the schools were in the education journals. And actually, since my university, my undergraduate university was a teaching school, not my graduate degree. Of course, there were pro and con articles on the subject. I was pro sex education in the schools. Several articles mentioned that teachers who were humanists would teach bad things to the students. Abstract terms are hard for me to verbalize, but I liked the term, and so I went to the big dictionary at the library. Remember that? It was like this thick, it had its own stand, and I looked up humanism. The definition: an outlook or system of thought attaching prime importance to human rather than divine or supernatural matters. Humanist beliefs stress the potential value and goodness of human beings, emphasizing common human needs, and seek solely rational ways of solving human problems. Holy cow. That was me. Who knew? And I sure wouldn't teach my students in school bad things. I mean, I would only teach them good ways of living. In my next class, I shared with a fellow mature student. I was 34 when I went back to school. He was of a like age, about what I had discovered, especially in my readings, especially about the humanist part. His reply: Sue, you ought to go to the Unitarian Universalist Church. Huh? What's that? I looked for a church in the telephone book, a reference material at the time. There was one in my town. Holy cow. It met in a nondescript, small cement block building with a steel front door. For those of you who have been in Unitarian Universalism a long time, oftentimes they had to have steel front doors so the bombings wouldn't tear down the building or tear down the front door. I was late, so I snuck in, didn't really know all what was going on. The program was being put on by folks from some religion that wore robes and burned incense at their services. My thought: one church allowing another religion to put on the program? How great. A few days later, I visited my dentist. He was new to me. And lo and behold, he was president of the congregation. But are these Unitarian Universalists all around and I just was out of the loop? I didn't know. I asked him about the incense, and he says, oh, no, we don't do that. That was just that group, which was good because me and incense don't work together well. It became home, and when I realized all four of the physics professors at the University of Texas at Arlington were Unitarian Universalists, I was hooked for sure. Within 2 years, I was president. Surprise, leading the worship services and printing the order of service. That occurred the first week of November, 1980. almost 42 years ago. One event that cemented my commitment to Unitarian Universalists was the development of the principles and purposes. Back then, there were no principles and purposes. They hadn't been developed yet. There was a list of 10 things. Does anybody remember what they were? I don't know. But the Unitarian Universalist Association, the UUA, asked folks in all the churches to meet and discuss what should be included in a principles and purposes. We met after church one Sunday, and everyone gave their thoughts, of course. We compiled our ideas and sent them to the UUA, and a year later, the principles and purposes were published. I was impressed because the process of developing the principles and purposes began at the bottom with us folks and went up to the top, as opposed to being told what we should believe. When I discovered I was not a Christian, I really got mad. I realized I would not be looked at as a good Christian woman. I was afraid my reputation would be in jeopardy, if I had one, I don't know. I blamed my parents, though I didn't tell them, because the family didn't talk about religion. Probably that, yeah, I'm sure that's why I didn't, get really hooked into Christianity. Over my UU career, I have been president of 3 churches, served on many, many committees, led lots and lots of services, and now I am slowing down my participation. But that's another story. Now to change the subject a bit. In the spring, I asked if any of y'all had a favorite hymn and would like to talk about it here at the service. No one responded. But I have one I want to share, so I will. Our hymnal, the gray one, Singing the Living Tradition, was published in 1993. I was attending the UU Fellowship of Dallas, now known as the UU Church of Oak Cliff, and chaired the committee to raise money for the new hymnals. Our goal was 50, and we purchased 80. When I left the church, I took one of them with me. That's off my conscience now. I've never told anyone before. To celebrate the new hymnal, the 7 of us who had attended the Dwight Brown Leadership School the previous few years went through the entire hymnal looking for our most favorite hymn or reading. We explained why it meant so much to us, and then we sang or read it. I chose We Laugh, We Cry by Shelley Jackson Denham. The lyrics talk about the importance of life and living in our community. I am moved every time I sing that hymn. We sang it 2 weeks ago, so y'all are gonna learn it real well. And I still teared up. In 2001, I was interviewing to work at the Mountain Retreat and Learning Center in Highlands, North Carolina. It is a camp and conference center on top of Little Scaly Mountain in Highlands, North Carolina, and they celebrate UU principles. Of course, I met the staff, and one name rang a bell, Shelley Denham. I couldn't place it, but for some reason I was drawn to the hymnal. And sure enough, She was the author of We Laugh, We Cry. It was an honor to meet her. While working there, I learned some of the other hymns that she wrote, one of which is in the Teal hymnal, and we sang last week, When I Am Afraid. And guess which hymn we're going to close with? I know we just sang it, but internalize the words, read the words. I went online looking for what video to use, and there were several of ministers who used that hymn as their text. I'm not going to do that today, but internalize the words. I think it's great. It's good to remember why community is so important.